Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're diving into the history of the Ford Falcon, the car that started as a fragile American import and somehow became one of the most iconic cars in Australian motoring. If you've seen my last video on the history of Holden, you'll know how dominant they were in the post-war years. The Falcon was Ford's attempt to take them on, and it was a story of risk, failure, reinvention, and one of the fiercest rivalries Australia has ever seen. Let's get into it. After World War II, Australia was changing fast. We had a booming population thanks to immigration. We were building new suburbs at record speed, and the government wanted Australia to make its own cars instead of importing them. To make that happen, they set up high tariffs on imported cars, often 40 to 50%. So overseas models were far more expensive unless they were built here. They also offered incentives to companies willing to set up local manufacturing. Holden took full advantage, launching the FX in 1948 and quickly locking in market dominance. By the late 1950s, they were selling 3 out of every 4 cars in Australia. Ford, meanwhile, was stuck selling British imports like the Zephyr and the Console, cars that were too small, underpowered, and frankly, out of touch with what Australian drivers wanted. If Ford wanted to survive, they needed a family sized car to match Holden, and they needed it fast. Meanwhile, in the United States, Ford had launched a new compact car, the Falcon. It was smaller and lighter than the big American sedans, cheap to run and designed for young families. It was selling well in the US, and Ford Australia saw an opening. Instead of spending years developing a new model from scratch, they could take the American Falcon, ship it to Australia, and sell it as their answer to Holden. It was modern, stylish, and priced to compete. In 1960, the first Falcon arrived by ship, ready to take the fight to Holden on Australian soil. At first, Ford's gamble looked like it was paying off. The Falcon was a hit in showrooms. It had fresh styling compared to the Holden's conservative look, and it appealed to buyers who wanted something different. But the honeymoon didn't last. The Falcon was designed for smooth American highways, not the long, rough, and unforgiving roads of Australia. Within months, problems started piling up. Suspension components bent or snapped, gearboxes wore out quickly, even basic fitting struggled to handle the conditions. For buyers who'd grown up with Holden's bulletproof reputation, it was a bad first impression. Ford's big move to challenge Holden was turning into an expensive embarrassment. Ford's problems weren't just mechanical, they were political and economic. Because the cars were fully imported from America, they were hit with those high tariffs, eating into Ford's profits. To compete in the long term, Ford would have to build the Falcon locally, but that meant millions of dollars in investment, building new facilities like the Broadmeadows plant in Victoria, training a workforce, negotiating with powerful unions, and setting up an Australian supply chain. Holden had been doing that for over a decade with strong government support. Ford was the outsider, trying to break into a market that was stacked in favour of the company already on top. But Ford didn't back down. Engineers went through the Falcon piece by piece, strengthening the suspension, reinforcing the chassis, and reworking the drivetrain for durability. By 1962, the Falcon was being assembled locally, and each new model, the XL, XM, and eventually the XP, became tougher and better suited for Australian roads. The XP Falcon of 1965 was the turning point. It looked sharp, it was reliable, and Ford launched a bold new Mustang bred advertising campaign, linking it to the excitement of the Mustang, which had become a cultural icon in America, while sending a clear message: this Falcon was built for Australia. But still, Ford knew they had to prove it, so they staged one of the gutsiest PR moves in Australian automotive history. Several XP Falcons were driven non-stop for 70,000 miles, or over 112,000 kilometres at full speed around the Yuyang's Proving Ground in Victoria. It was a massive risk. If the cars broke down, it would have confirmed every criticism, but they didn't break. They finished in perfect running condition, and Ford splashed the results across newspapers, TV, and dealer showrooms. The Falcon's reputation was rebuilt overnight. By the late 1960s, the Falcon had secured its place in Australian life. Families trusted it for long road trips, tradies bought the utes, and young drivers fell in love with the performance models. The Falcon's growing presence in motorsport, especially at Bathurst, helped cement a rivalry with Holden that went beyond cars. They weren't just choosing a brand, they were picking a side in a national debate. Ford or Holden became part of your identity, passed down through generations. Politically, the Falcon's success mattered too. Car factories meant jobs, and jobs meant votes. Politicians turned up to launches, toured the factories, and used them as proof that Australian manufacturing was strong. In the decades that followed, the Falcon kept evolving, from the muscle car GTs of the 1970s to the fuel-conscious family sedans of the 1980s and 90s. It was part of the backdrop of Australian life. The car you learned to drive in, the one you loaded up for holidays, the one you watched thunder down Conrad Strait. But in 2016, after 56 years and millions of cars built, the last Falcon rolled off the Broadmeadows line. It marked the end not just of a model, but of an era, the close of mass car manufacturing in Australia. From a shaky American import to a car that defined generations, the Falcon's story is a reminder of how we took something foreign, reshaped it for our own, and made it part of our national identity. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Falcon's history, hit like, subscribe, and check out my Holden video to see the other side of this great rivalry. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.